So this week I had Monday off in order to do some of the work, and I missed a dramatic thing inside the Lords, which was that a government front bench minister, Lord Agnew, resigned at the dispatch box. You might well have seen it on the TV. I only saw it on the TV because I missed it in the Lords. It, I think, was significant though for the general mood of what's happening in Parliament. Was he resigned because he was so frustrated that he couldn't get any resolution to the fraud that's been going on in terms of lockdown loans and COVID loans and so on. And he knew that if they'd pursued those loans properly, then they actually could have got lots of the money back. But instead, they're going to end up writing off billions of pounds worth of loans through absolute bureaucratic rules, regulations, incompetence, all sorts of things. And he didn't want to be associated with it because he knew what needed to be done. He told people what needed to be done for months, and they were all ignoring him. That is a huge scandal that's associated with the COVID era. And it's one of the reasons why I feel so frustrated that the scandal that we're talking about in relation to the COVID era is still the Boris Johnson Partygate, different renditions of that story. Because I actually think that I do want an inquiry. I do want us to be able to come to terms with what happened, to learn the lessons of it, and not to repeat some of the terrible errors that were made. But this preoccupation with removing Boris Johnson through trying to delegitimise him because of the parties is in danger of drowning out all of the other more important scandals, genuine scandals that should bring the Tories down. So don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that Boris Johnson deserves to be the Prime Minister at this stage. I'm saying that the reasons for it might be a lot deeper than those that we're being shown at the moment. And like everyone else, one wishes it was resolved one way or another. So the atmosphere in the Lords at the moment is still lots of people in huddles. There's lots of kind of conspiratorial party gatherings, Conservatives who are either for or against him. You know, Labour front benchers getting together and discussing what the likelihood of him staying is and so on. So that's the mood. It's unsavoury to say the least, and it doesn't reflect the big issues facing the country, and it's driving me mad. I actually was on Tuesday there for the third reading of the Police and Crime Bill. The third reading is peculiar because it's effectively the end of the bill in the Lords, and you are finishing off the bill and sending the amended bill back down, literally on a platter, by the way, it's carried all the way down, to the Commons, which is just at the end of the corridor. So it was interesting to be there at the end. There were a few amendments put through, one of which is important, which is that these terrible IPPs, which were introduced in the past and keep people indefinitely in jail and on licence, so bad that they've been abolished, brought in by David Blunkett. He's subsequently in the Lords apologised for having brought them in. There was an amendment that was put forward actually by Lord Moylan that the government accepted a tiny part of. So they amended the bill in a small way to give a tiny bit of hope to those people who are historically victims of injustice, but they won't retrospectively sort it out. At least some minor change happened there. But there was another big row happened, which was that the Labour Party put forward an amendment on Harper's Law for the third reading. This is the law that would have you means that you get mandatory life sentence from the age of 16 if you accidentally kill a policeman or an ambulanceman or anyone or woman, anyone of those services, and a mandatory life sentence a long time, as it's for an accidental death. And the Labour Party put forward that amendment because they said that we hadn't been given procedurally enough time to discuss it. It was kind of hijacked on. But before we ever got to discuss it, the Chief Whip spoke and said, you shouldn't be raising this amendment at all procedurally, because this is trying to amend the bill that's been amended. We're trying to send it back to the Commons. And the Labour Party said, no, we're not. We've accepted the spirit that we lost, but we're just trying to give more time for a discussion and bring it back in some form. So there was a row about procedurally what was allowed or not. And I actually supported the Labour Party on that. This is significant because Shami Chakrabarti said thank you yesterday, which is a turn-up for the books historically. And actually, as it happens, it's the Labour Party's fault it went through in the first place because they didn't notice how bad it was the first time round. And it was only when I and a number of other people spoke on it that they realised that they'd missed what was happening. But it's the way that the government said you can't do this, it's procedurally wrong. And then actually they were responding to the fact that they had procedurally bent the stick in bringing forward that amendment very late on in the report stage of the bill in the first place. It was quite a kind of interesting, bitter exchange. Anyway, the Labour Party didn't push it for a vote, which I regretted that they didn't. I would have voted for them. So I've been there for the end of a bill. It's now gone back to the Commons. The Commons will debate the amended bill, and it will come back probably still with the protest amendments added on again, and we'll have a bit of a toing and froing. That's what's known as ping pong, as it will go between both houses till it's eventually settled. But we're at the end of it. Effectively, it will be finished fairly soon. There was also a procedural row yesterday, which is that the health and social care bill, which I'm not following through, there was an amendment put forward by Michael Forsyth. I might have said this last week, which was to amend the health and social care bill to add in an assisted dying amendment, which would basically mandate the government to bring in an assisted dying piece of legislation, which would be a very dangerous precedent to set. And so we were all worked up to do lots of speeches on assisted dying. I feel very passionately against assisted dying, but it was agreed that it would be argued over in terms of procedure constitutionally, and that was from, as it were, my side, that it would be argued that this was an inappropriate way of using the health and social care bill to try and bring in a piece of what is effectively criminal law. And so that argument happened late into the night last night, but wasn't substantially about assisted dying at all. And I'd agreed not to speak on assisted dying, so I was very frustrated, so I didn't stay till the end once I knew there wasn't a vote. Today, I am about to go in and speak on the new Nationality and Borders Bill, and it's now the committee stage of that bill, and it's the first time that I've got a named amendment. So my name is attached to Lord Moylan's amendment, in which I will argue against the powers for the Secretary of State to be able to revoke citizenship. And it's an amendment that actually, when you read it, you think, oh, I don't know if I agree with all of this, but it basically rolls the law back to 1981. So it's kind of what the powers were then, because the powers have grown substantially since then. So it goes back to a kind of status quo in the modern era situation. But I'm kind of quite anxious because my name's on it and I have to therefore do it some justice and speak. And it's a difficult issue to explain, so that's what I'm about to do. But the Nationality and Borders Bill is an important bill. It's very contentious when it comes to the asylum seekers, the boats, and so on and so forth. But that's not this first part, which is actually about citizenship. And it's actually quite positive because it's the government trying to right historic anomalies and give citizenship to people who should have always had citizenship, but they kind of got missed off the books. So actually it's possible to be quite positive about the first part of the bill, apart from this egregious part 9, which is going to give the Home Secretary Priti Patel the right to stop even more people from being citizens and not even tell them, and not allow them to appeal. So that's what's happening there. And then tomorrow there's a private members bill. Private members bills are drawn by lot. Every lord can put in to do one. They rarely get anywhere. It's kind of like almost an excuse for a debate, but they could get picked up. And I am speaking on Lord Andrew Adonis's private member bill, which he's apparently brought to the House before, which is an attempt to lower the voting age to 16. I'm going to argue strenuously against that. I'm hoping that all the intelligent, smart, political 16, 17 and 18-year-olds who are watching will know that that's because I wouldn't condescend to them to try and win their favours by getting them to vote. But that actually they're being used by the likes of Andrew Adonis as a stage army because they're assumed to have a particular political outlook. And I think it's actually an insult to the franchise to have this top-down piece of legislation come before the House. But you can imagine how unpopular I'm going to be tomorrow. That's it, I think, from inside the Lords. Last night I went to a celebration of Harry Hill's victory over the non-crime hate incidents which he won in the Supreme Court, and I thought that was a kind of link with the Lords because we'd actually had something of a bit of a victory in the Lords on the Police and Crime Bill earlier on, where the government had conceded that the non-crime hate incidents policing guidelines for the College of Policing were terrible, and the Supreme Court have also said that they're problematic. So there was some kind of link there, but actually, to be fair, the Lords didn't do very much really, and Harry Hill did. And it's to his credit that he took that to the courts. But it's not resolved yet, and hate crime legislation grows daily, it seems to me. But still, you claim victories when they happen. But also, interestingly, yesterday it was announced that the Equalities and Human Rights Commission have put out 2 scathing reports on the gender identity issue. One in which they urged the Scottish Parliament to roll back on self-ID, and also where they clarify that the conversion therapy bill, which will come before the Lords at some point, should not be used in any way to stop people counselling young people who are trying to decide whether they should transition or not. And it's been, as a consequence, the EHRC has been denounced as transphobic, stonewalling, distancing themselves. So this is significant because the EHRC is run by, the chair is Baroness Kishwa Faulkner. And so actually there is a link with the Lords there. And I think she's done a good job here in the EHRC. I don't mean because I agree with what she said, but because it's actually quite a balanced way that it's been dealt with. It's not kind of like quite as I would have done, which would have been to tear it all up, where she's actually dealt with it, I think, rather well. So it's interesting now that I'm kind of in the Lords. Every time I turn the telly on, there's some Baroness or Lords, but you think, oh God, they're everywhere. They're everywhere. You realise how influential the Lords are. I will always be a backbench troublemaker, right? No one's going to ask me to chair anything. Thank goodness for that. I don't want any of those jobs. But actually, they do run a lot of things, right? They are quite kind of everywhere you go. And that is worrying because ultimately, as I keep on reminding everyone, this is an unelected chamber. People have been appointed there for all sorts of goodness knows dodgy reasons, or even if it's non-dodgy, it's not as though there's a democratic mandate, and yet they are in positions of some authority. And I think that you should also listen out how often a baroness or a lord is in a decision-making position, because it's not good. But I'm now going to go off and make some decisions. See you next week.